What's good, party people? This is According to Woods, and I have the honor and privilege of talking to a good brother. He is, in any of the inside circles, a legend in this business. Went side by side with the great Quinton Rampage Jackson during his heyday in Pride. This guy was there. He's the one, the only, Tommy Rojas. Tommy, what's going on, bro?
Oh man, it's so great to talk MMA and help you and your podcast and help get my word out. And just the other day, I was talking to somebody who kind of understood MMA, but was kind of getting the names wrong and didn't quite have it. It was sort of like a disjointed, bad information. And I think that's what we're supposed to do, is help people understand how those founders of the sport ended up fighting each other and where those promotions were. And for this podcast to bring me on is an honor, and I hope that it helps your podcast, and I hope that it helps the listeners so that everybody increases their knowledge.
I appreciate that. I love it, right? And kind of getting into my backstory and people who know, kind of know. About 8 years ago, right? Wife, kids, the whole thing, and I was trading, jujitsu and some MMA, right? But I kind of lucked into a situation where one of the trainers at my gym, Heinrich Wasmer, at Fight Academy in Pasadena, California, he had a fight. He also, wanted some sizzle on the steak. And then I basically befriended a gentleman who was working as a videographer on the Amazing Race TV show. He's like, I can do stuff in better than the UFC. And I was like, what? Really? So I kind of hooked them up together. And then about 8 years ago, that's been it. And it's been an 8-year career where I get to talk to some of the archetypes of combat sports, such as yourself. So, man, it's an honor.
Thank you.
So
where would you like to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of spin it back. Like, how did you get involved in the combat sports world?
So I thought I wanted to be like a sure dog. And I'll tell you what, halfway through the first show I ever went to, I realized how hard that work was. And ironically, I was sitting next to Sure Dog at an IFC event in January of 2001. And I noticed that, and Josh Gross was sitting next to me on the other side, and we all had cameras because this was smartphone era. And I said, how do we get pictures, referring to that one little hole in the cage where you could stick your lens through? And they said, there's going to be plenty of chances for all of us. And I go, okay, cool. And then I realized you couldn't stand up because the people behind you paid, $300 for those seats. And if you knelt down, you couldn't see the fight. So you had to do like this half squat or your quads were just burning. And I thought, wow, I can't do this. So, and that wasn't really what I wanted to do. What I really wanted to do, I was very shy about saying it, but I wanted to manage fighters. I knew I wasn't going to be the trainer. And I knew that I had never managed fighters before, but I thought, I've been in the business world for a while, and I think I know how people want you to act if you represent them. And ironically, at the same time, I started a website called Primetime Fighters, and Tito had just fought Frank Shamrock, Frank from AKA, and as often did, the fighters would come over and train, and Tito was training at AKA, and I said he was getting ready to fight Yuki Kondo in the next UFC Japan, which had been a while in Japan, and I asked Tito if he would wear my T-shirt when he fought Yuki Kondo, and I knew there was going to be a fee, but I had to find out what it was because that was still what I thought I wanted to do, was be like a news and pictures and Sure Dog kind of thing, which, by the way, I think is an amazing website because it's a lot of work that they put into it. And he said, well, Tito says, yeah, that's cool. but you got to call my manager. And I said, okay, give me his name and his number and I'll call him. And he said, okay, his name is Dana White. Here's his number. So this was in December of 2009. And I called Dana and he was really cool. And he said, my plan was to send him the t-shirts and send him a prepaid FedEx so he could just stick them back in there and seal it and send it back. And I said, don't even worry about developing the pictures. I just threw a disposable camera in there. And he says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll have to charge you if they wear your t-shirts in the venue, but we'll get some pictures of the guys wearing your t-shirts. Well, the guys were the three people that Dana was managing, which was Tito, Tiki, and Chuck. So Tiki Goshen and Chuck Liddell and Tito. So I mailed him the t-shirts. They went to Tokyo. They fought. He mailed back t-shirts with those guys in wearing them, or pictures with those guys wearing them. And Dana was very cool. And my day job, I was working in the corporate world, and they had switched my territory at the beginning of 2001. And all of a sudden, they want me to go to Las Vegas. My day job wants me to go to Las Vegas. And we had a lot of business there, and they said, go as much as you can. So I called up Dana, and I go, well, you're not going to believe this, but I'm going to be in Vegas next week. And he says, cool. Come to the gym, and bring your suitcases, whoever's bringing you, or if you're going to rent a car, and just hang out here while I finish this workout, and we'll go across the street and eat. So that's what I did. I went to the they had a covered parking area with a gym underneath that in the basement of the building, next to Gordon Bierce, as a matter of fact, on West Sahara. They probably are still in that building. And so I walked in there with a suitcase, and he was holding pads for a gentleman that had a real clean-cut look, and they were in the ring. And I said, I don't want to interrupt you. I'm Tommy. And he goes, hey, what's going on? And he shook my hand, and he goes, this is Frank Fertitta. And I didn't know who Frank Fertitta was, but he seemed like a really nice gentleman. He said hello to me, and he said, just hang out. We're almost done. And they finished, and we went to dinner. It was just me and Dana. And got together with him the next day, and I did some business on my day job, and came back the next week for my day job, and I went back to the gym, and I worked out, and we were going up the staircase, and he introduced me to another gentleman, and he said, this is Frank's brother, Lorenzo Fertitta. And I said, very nice to meet you. And he's very, very nice gentleman. And of course, I had no idea who they were. And I used to call Javier, the owner at AKA, and I would say, I met these two brothers, I think. Their last name is Fertitta, and Javier would go, yeah, they own casinos. I go, oh, really? Wow. So anyway, that's kind of how it went for a while, for a few months. And then I was in Vegas picking up lunch to go for a client, and my phone rang, and I knew it was Dana White, and he said, hey, are you in town? I said, yeah, what's going on? He said, would you do an interview on me? And I said, yeah. What do you want to talk about? He goes, we just bought the UFC. And I said, get the fuck out of here. He goes, no shit, we did. I go, really, when? He goes, last week. I go, oh. He goes, so let's be at my office at 5, and we'll do the interview, and then we'll go across the street and eat. So I didn't realize how big of a thing that was, but everybody had left the UFC and was going to Pride, if you remember. So I did the interview. We ate. The next week I was there. He brought Joe Silva. Well, Joe Silva ended up being their matchmaker for many years. And then, Dana did something pretty incredible. He called Pride, the IFC, which is the Fresno Table Mountain casino promotion, and he called King of the Cage. And he said to all of them, individual phone calls, he says, I'm sitting here with a gentleman named Tommy Rojas, and I think he's going to be good for our sport. And I still don't quite know what's going on because he hadn't made that announcement yet about buying. This is like 1 week from another about buying the UFC. But he said, I'd like you to take his phone call when he calls you. So long story short, back at AKA, Bobby Southworth, who, Bobby, if you're listening, I love you for letting me into your world. And I remember looking at Bobby thinking, don't you want to be in the UFC? Because Bobby was just this stunning, impressive athlete. And he goes, yeah. And Javier, after he and I had talked and I told him what was happening in Vegas, he said to Bobby, I think you should let Tommy manage you. And Bobby was the first fighter that I represented. And between January of 2001, when I saw my first MMA event, which was in the IFC at Table Mountain Casino in Friant, California, between January and the first week of November, when I had Quinton fighting in the UFC in Pride, Quinton in Pride, and Bobby Hoffman fighting in the UFC on the same night, 10 months later. All that had happened. I became Quinton. Huh?
That is incredible. I mean, I can't. It's crazy because those are some legendary names now in hindsight, right? But Dana White, Lorenzo, and Frank Fertitta, right? You were there when they, pretty much when they bought the thing, right? And nobody thought it was going to be anything. Now, it's a part of the TKO holding group, right? Under the auspices of Ari Emanuel, the guy who acquired Jeremy Piven's character in Entourage, compared with the WWE, a $1 billion corporation, and you were there, just kind of in the trenches. Do we need them? Oh no, here he is. Yeah.
When I was going to their offices every week, which, like I said, my boss for my day job wanted me in Vegas as much as possible, and I never led them to know that I was getting into MMA because, in the corporate world, unfortunately, to their own demise, they want to give you shit if you're not performing at your job. Well, that's because he's got that side job. Well, that's because he's doing that MMA thing. So I never let them know what I was doing. In fact, when I went to Tokyo with Quinton, I never told my boss. I just took vacation and told them I was staying at home because, I just didn't trust them. And first time you have a bad month, they're going to throw that in your face. So they just said, be in Vegas as much as you can. So I was in Vegas every week. And when I got to know Joe Silva and Dana White, and I met the Fertittas, it all just seemed like, I know how to open doors. I'm working on a book, and one of the things that one of your intentions when you write a book or perhaps come out on a podcast is you should inspire somebody to want to do what you did. And managing fighters is not easy, and it's doesn't pay well most of the time, but the experiences that I had that I will share with you here are unlike any other experiences that you could ever expect to have doing anything else. And it started because, and I don't use a lot of buzzwords, but I opened up doors and I knew how to make relationships, real relationships. Because Dana White called me to do an interview on him. I didn't call him. And I knew something was up because they have an In-N-Out burger right outside the at the curb of this shopping center, if you will, that the buildings were in. And because I know sometimes people don't have time to meet with you, sometimes they don't have time to eat. So if I can bring you a couple of bags of burgers and some fries and we can talk, we'll talk and eat. And if we can't, enjoy your lunch. And I remember going into this conference room inside what became the Zuffa buildings, and I remember seeing all these sticky notes all over the wall, and I go, those were the brainstorming notes as they were getting ready to close their deal with Bob Myrowitz, who I think it was SEG.
SEG. Man, that's wild. That's super wild. Because I mean, now obviously, what was the condition of the UFC at the time? Because if you read the lore, I think what initially sparked the interest of Dana and the Fertittas buying the UFC was the fact that Dana was negotiating a contract for Chuck Liddell, right? And I guess somebody at SEG were like, I think Chuck is worth it, but we just don't have that. We're bleeding money, right?
Well,
Is that
yeah.
the ethos to that?
I'm trying to remember what the little idiosyncrasies of that scenario were, but Tito was their poster child, and he lost to Frank. So Frank had beaten everybody he faced in the UFC. He armbarred the Kevin Jackson, the Olympic wrestler. He dumped that Russian guy on his head, slammed him. He was out. And then he beat Tito. And then he told the UFC he was out. And he never fought for them again because he didn't think they had the money to pay him. So I'm not really sure where that stood in line with your question on Chuck, but Chuck had already fought in the UFC, I believe. That one I can't remember because Chuck was the previous light heavyweight champ of the IFC, who the IFC and King of the Cage, they were like AAA baseball is to the majors. Those guys were right there. They weren't quite in the UFC, but then after that, if you remember, Pride was the place to be. And I got to know Pride simultaneously as I got to know the IFC, the UFC, and King of the Cage. So to me, I was constantly like on the road, always trying, like I flew down to meet with, Pride was run by a husband and wife. The husband was Hideki and the wife was Yukino. And they had an office on Wilshire Boulevard in LA. And I flew down there with some photos and some bios on a couple of fighters, including Bobby Southworth. And so I was talking to them all the time. Now, I still haven't got to how I met Quinton. And I just wanted to kind of lay down the foundation on how I got to that point, because remember in January I went to my first fight, and that was an IFC, and then I found out that there were King of the Cages down in Saboba, and I went down there, and I got to know the promoters. That's what it was all about. Because like when Dana called Paul Smith from IFC, Terry Treblecock from King of the Cage, and Yukino Konda from Pride, he said the same thing to them. He said, I'm sitting here with a gentleman named Tommy Rojas, and I believe he'll be good for our sport. Well, I didn't even have a fit yet. I didn't know where I was going to be. But when Javier told Bobby, I think you should let Tommy manage you, and Bob Cook endorsed it. And you know who Brian Johnston is? The
Yeah,
big, gigantic, right? Right?
right.
Well, he said it too. He told Bobby, yes, I think Javier's right. I think you should let Tommy manage you. So I went to Pride and I tried to get them to take Bobby, but they kept trying to spin a Frank Shamrock Sakuraba fight because they thought that Bobby Southworth and Frank were teammates, the Lion's Den. They thought he was Lion's Den. And the Lion's Den was Ken Shamrock.
Yeah, the Lions. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he
So
carried that over into the WWF when he did that sojourn and
right.
sabbatical from the UFC. That was a part of his persona. From the Lions Den, California, Ken Shamrock, the world's most dangerous man.
But Frank was not with his brother. Frank was at AKA, and Bobby wasn't with Frank. So Pride, I couldn't get him off that, and they kept teasing me. Well, we can get Bobby a fight, but can Frank corner him? Because that'll save them the dime and get Frank and Bobby over there together, and they can promote the Sakuraba fight. And I was frustrated. Now, mind you, this is fight number 1 for me, okay? And I'm getting put through the fucking grind because I'm trying to do right by everybody. But one of the things Frank taught me was you got to watch the Japanese promoters, man, because they will fuck with you. And when I tell you the story about Colin and Quinton in K1, that was the epitome of fucking with you. So anyway, so I couldn't get Pride to agree to let Bobby fight without conditioning it with Frank as a corner. And Bobby wasn't jiggy with it because Frank would want to be paid, and I didn't understand money yet. So I was kind of at a standstill. And I was frustrated because I'm used to doing things right away. I've only probably been doing this a month and a half because they fought. I got Bobby that fight against Vitor. That was my first fight, was Bobby against Vitor. And I think it was March of 01. So it didn't take me that long, but I have high expectations. And the way that it happened was Don Fry and Brian Johnston had become pro wrestlers in Japan. And those guys were thick as thieves. And they would go to Japan and they would tour. And every night they were in a different town. But there was this one rare night when I caught them where they were off. And they might have had a cocktail or two. And I called them. It was Monday here. And they were in a speakerphone in a hotel room. And they said, why haven't you got Bobby a fight yet? And I said, I'm trying to work with that lady from Pride. And they said, like, it was like they were looking at each other. What do you got now? I go, nothing. They go, okay then. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to call Dream Stage. You're going to ask for Mr. Sakakibara. The lady on the phone is going to say he doesn't speak English. She's going to ask for your name and your number and tell you that Kawasaki's going to call. And I'm like, who's Kawasaki? He's a booker. Don't worry about it. Call now. It's 3:00. They're all at work. I go, fuck. I better do that. So I called Dream Stage, which was the parent to K1 or to Pride. And sure enough, man. Can I speak with Mr. Sakakibara? Mr. Sakakibara not speak English. May I know your name? I said, yeah, it's Tommy Rojas. May I have your phone number? Give her my number. She goes, Mr. Kawasaki will call you right back. So Adam, have you ever heard of Kawasaki?
Of course. The
He's a booker.
motorcycle.
No. Kawasaki is a freelance matchmaker.
Oh,
All the
yeah,
promotions,
100%.
they all trust him. Okay? So they give him like a budget and they give him certain names that they need to get fighters for. Well, 30 minutes later, Kawasaki's on the phone and I got a fight with Bobby against Vitor in Pride.
Holy
Just
bejesus.
like that. Just like that.
Well, I mean, just like that, but I mean, they put you through the fucking ringer to do that. I mean, literal, take your name, take your number, like that's wild because everybody knows what they want here, right? There's still some kind of like chicanery that is going on. That they have to put you through a trial by fire. A great Journey album, by the way, but yeah, well, but yeah, but I mean, you made it, and again, Bobby Southwood versus Vitor Belfort. Holy shit, man, that's fireworks.
And I learned so much about matchmaking because what I learned from my teacher, Javier Mendez, is that don't discuss the fight with the fighter. Don't discuss the money, the fight. Don't discuss. Talk to the coach. Talk to the coach. Because the coach knows the state of the fighter's health. He'll know the matchup. He'll know if he can make weight on that day. There's travel involved. Got to make sure everybody can go because they go a week early, if not more, depending on where they're fighting. And so I was just so excited. I made the first fight and I fucked up 3 or 4 things, but I popped my cherry. Okay, so I'll know better next time. Well, next time came very quick. So this is where Quinton comes in. So Quinton fought Sakuraba, as we all know. Okay. And Quinton almost threw him out of the ring. It was tremendous. All right. So after the fight, I got a call from King of the Cage. And King of the Cage said, the Japanese want to offer Quinton a multi-fight contract, but they don't want to talk directly to him. They want him to have a manager. Will you manage him? And I go, yeah, fuck. Yeah, tell him yeah. They said, okay, here's what you have to do. Okay, you're going to get a call from Bud. Now, Bud was the one that made all the DVDs for Gladiator and King of the Cage and Pride. So Pride and King of the Cage were in bed. It was a good relationship. When you went to King of the Cage, there was always Pride fighters there. Like Sakuraba would go there and Giant Ochai and all these guys. So it's kind of cool. So Bud produced the DVDs for the 3 promotions, Pride, King of the Cage, and Gladiator. And Bud was a cool guy. So Bud calls me up and he says, okay, so you're going to manage Quinton. And the first thing you have to do is you got to call the Pride lawyer. I forgot her name, but Quinton had an outstanding warrant that he had to pay. So they were going to let me borrow the money from Pride from his future earnings. So they had long plans for Quinton. They liked him. They liked the whole thing, the chain. Remember, this is right before 9/11. So This is all of 2001. And so Quinton had an old outstanding warrant that had to get paid. So they wanted it paid. So I had to call the Pride lawyer and get an advance on his future earnings. And then Quinton had to go pay the court. It was up in Shasta from when he was at college. He used to wrestle with Matt Yushchenko. So that gets paid, and they have him fight in a warm-up show in battle arts against the Diet Butcher. Alexander Otsuka went by the nickname of the Diet Butcher. That was what it said on his shorts.
Right.
Kind of funny, right? And if you look at those pictures, Battle Arts, which was the name of the promotion, his corner was Boss Rutan and Shannon Rich.
Shannon the Cannon. Boss Rutan. Holy shit.
Right. So Quinton didn't have any shorts, and he borrowed Shannon's shorts. And those were the Apollo Creed, red, white, and blue. Those were Shannon's shorts.
Wow.
That Quinton kept. So we made a deal, and that was his first fight. Nobody knows that was actually the first fight after Sakuraba. And then he went back, and I forgot who he fought, but he fought in October, and it was a revenge fight. And Quinton fought the partner of the Battle Arts promotion, and that's the one I went to, where I'm holding up that sign and we're looking at the cameras after the knockout. But that was the revenge fight for beating up his buddy, and Quinton knocked him out too.
Which is, I mean, kind of par course for Quinton at that moment, right?
Oh, he was just getting started, man. He was just getting started.
So, I mean, did you know what you had in these guys? I mean, Bobby Southland, first off, I mean, that's a legendary name that, I mean, when I was my initial, dalliances of watching, Pride, because I was a Pride guy first, right? I remember my cousin having a box of some sort that you didn't have to pay for pay-per-views. And we were watching Pride because he knew I was hard in the paint in pro wrestling. And he was like, no, there's this other thing. And this guy has a chain, and Quinton was like one of my first guys, along with Wanderlei and obviously Sakuraba. I'm a catch wrestling guy. So, yeah. So, I mean, speaking the names, I'm all like, you were there in the infancy of a lot of legendary fights.
Like I'm telling you, man, it was hard to believe, but I think because I was older and I was more mature and I was used to like maybe more pressure business deals in my day-to-day job, which was I was in the corporate world. I was a trainer, and I had to get into people's emotional shorts a little bit to take care of the training that they wanted done in their business with their, people who may not have bought into the training. So it was never easy because there's always there was always haters. Okay. And so I met Quinton. Check this shit out. Talk about a tangle fucking web. Okay. It was agreed that I would meet Quinton at Wanderlei. No. Yes. Remember Rum Jungle? Was Rum Jungle? Rum Jungle? Was that at the Wanderlei or the Bellagio? That was at the Wanderlei, right?
I believe it was Wanderlei because when UFC starts running it, there was some tension there between Jungle.
Right. Because I had been there on business before, and so I didn't have his phone number yet, but I told him I gave, I think, King of the Cage. I told him to give Quinton my number, and I'll meet him at Rum Jungle because it was weigh-ins for K1 Bellagio. Now follow me on this. I was managing Shannon Rich, and because of my relationship with Strikeforce and AKA and eventually and K1, That was under the Scott Coker umbrella, and he used Javier and Bob Cook as his matchmakers. And Frank wanted a K1 fight at the Bellagio. And they called me and they asked me if Shannon would fight Frank Shamrock in K1. And that was the weekend I was going to meet Quinton. So on the weekend I was supposed to meet Quinton, I made a fight for Shannon to fight Frank in kickboxing in K1. So like the fucking hits just keep on coming. And the drama was that Shannon Rich had 2 fights on a contract with Pride. The first one was Sakuraba, which he lost, and they wouldn't give him the second fight. So they said, because they were still trying to get Frank, we had dinner before the fight in the Bellagio. They said, if you knock Frank out, we'll get you your second fight in Pride, which I thought was kind of bullshit that they have to put such a stipulation on it like that, you know? And the drama was, somehow I missed it that Shannon had a broken arm 3 weeks before the fight. So now we're in the Bellagio, and all my AKA buddies are coming out with Frank Shamrock, and I'm with Shannon's corner man from Arizona. And Shannon's got an arm that's about 2 weeks out from being broken. So it's not quite healed. And I didn't know until it was too late because I had made the fight already with Coker, and I didn't want to pull Frank or Shannon out because then Frank wouldn't have a fight, you know? So we pretty much crossed our fingers and said, I hope Frank doesn't kick you in the arm. Because Shannon's a gamer and he wanted that fight. So the bell rang and Frank came right after him and threw a head kick, and Shannon blocked it with his broken arm, and he went to the ground writhing in pain. And I thought I was going to be part of some fucking scandal. The lady from Pride was right there sitting ringside, and they're looking at me, and everybody thought Frank kicked him in the head. He blocked the kick if you look at it, but the arm was broken. So that was kind of a dark time. I eventually told Javier what happened, and he goes, yeah, it's a good thing you didn't say anything because we would have pulled the fight and Frank wouldn't have gotten a fight. So everybody was happy except Shannon's girlfriend. She was trying to stop the fight. And that's the night I met Quinton. What the fuck, you know? It's like bombs blowing off, going everywhere, and doors are opening, and people are doing crazy shit, which is the fight business.
It really is, though. I mean, it takes a special type of person, and then the people who stay, a group of people to kind of withstand some of the fucking bullshit that happens, right? And again,
that was 6 months. That was 6 months into my managing career.
Oh man, and geez, it kind of makes you chase the dragon proverbially ever since, right? Because what does that? I mean, yes, you were talking about your high pressure job as a trainer and what and crazy business deals, but again, like you're kind of mask the fact that somebody has a broken arm, you know, so they to set up a fight, the real fight you want, you know, and it not that you mean it to be as you know Shannon Rich and his arm to be a sacrificial lamb, but you know you got to get this fucking deal done.
Shannon wants the fight. And he didn't tell me about
He
the
does.
broken arm.
Friend of the show, by the way. He's been on here. Yeah. That's Shannon like a motherfucker.
He's a nice guy, man. I tell you, he's such a cool guy that one time I was going on vacation to Mexico and we had a layover in Dallas, like 2 hours. And he actually drove to the airport and went through security and sat with me and my family for an hour while we waited for my plane.
Yeah.
Just to spend time with me, just to get to know him.
That is also Shannon the Cannon Rich, who I feel like him and Dan Severn have to be the most, like, have had the most fights in their combat sports career. They're in the triple digits in terms of fights, across, kickboxing. I mean, some even pro wrestling and stuff. But yeah, the quality human that Shannon Ridge is. So shout out to Shannon. Always a fun time to talk to that guy.
And it's funny how it all started, but there were like these nucleuses, and like the Arizona nucleus was Don Fry. Okay, Don Fry sent me Sam Sotelo,
Wow.
Shannon, Jeff Funicello. I go, Jeff, are you related to Annette Funicello? He goes, yeah, that's my aunt. She was on the original Mickey Mouse Club, right?
Yeah.
So, but the education I got, I met Mark Kerr, Rulon Gardner.
Yeah, Gardner. Yeah.
Matt Linlin, all these people, because they were all Sunkist kids wrestlers,
right?
And that's where they all came from. So when I met Jeff, I met him through Fry and Shannon, and then I met other people through Fry, and I don't know, do you know who Sam Sotelo is?
Yeah.
Sam Sotelo was such a exciting story because I got him his first fight, and it always seemed like everybody I got was fighting someone from AKA who were my friends. And I got Sam a fight against Paul Buentello.
Whoa.
And it was a gargantua fight in IFC. Gargantua fight. And Sam came from, he had a buddy named Rainy Martinez, and so all these guys that came just from the Don Fry part of it. And then there was a bunch of guys out of Chicago. I used to manage Shoney Carter, Brian Gassaway, who's the other guy? And then there was some people out of Atlanta. But let me tell you, the moment I was most proud of Quinton, okay, was before he got to the UFC. And what I had learned was that K1, Pride, and New Japan Pro Wrestling all came from the same place.
Yep.
Okay? And Pride called me and asked me if Quinton would fight in K1. And I thought, oh, fuck, Quinton's never even done a smoker in kickboxing. Now, he was with Colin Oyama at the time.
Whoa, is this the story that you kind of alluded to?
Yes. So he was with Colin Oyama at that time. And Quinton's fighting, his stand-up had improved when he started training with Colin. He started moving his head. He started to hold his hands up higher. He started throwing, like real boxing combos. And Quinton was never a big kicker. He's a wrestler that could, body slam you. And now he was adding boxing to his forte. And now here he is being asked to fight K1 rules.
Mhm.
And following protocol, like Javier taught me, I called up Colin Oyama. This is why I think he's a fucking gangster, because I called him up. And I remember Frank Shamrock said, Tommy, the Japanese don't have a problem throwing you a hook, like playing you, in other words. He said, they consider it shame on you if you don't catch it. And they had done that with Quinton in opponents in Pride, and I can tell you about those later, but it was this K1 fight, and I called up Colin, and I don't remember who their first opponent was, and Colin goes, fuck, yeah, we'll fight him. Tell him yes. So about 2 weeks go by, and Pride calls me back and says, remember that guy? Well, he can't make it. We got Musashi. And I'm trying to do my homework before I call Colin so I can sound somewhat educated. But I don't know who some of these guys are. I can see their record, but I don't know who they are. They're not household names like they are for me and MMA fighters. And I called up Colin. I go, hey, they changed your opponent. He goes, yeah, no surprise. Who they want now? I go, Musashi. He goes, fuck it. We'll knock him out. Tell him yes. I go, really? Really? He goes, yeah, fuck it. We'll knock him out. I go, my man. Right? So I called up Pride. I go, fuck it. We'll take the fight. Well, like Frank Shamrock said, sometimes the real opponent is the last opponent.
Uh-huh.
So they came back a third time, and it was Cyril Abadi, like Cyril Gone.
Jeez.
Abidi, Cyril Abadi, 6'3", 220, 20 fucking kickboxing fights, and I'm going, fuck. You guys aren't trying to build a fucking star, Let him fight MMA.
Yeah.
Anyway, I called up Colin. You know what Colin said?
Fuck it.
Fuck it. Fuck it. We'll fucking knock him out. I go, no shit. He goes, yep. Tell him yes. We'll knock him out. Well, that day came. And I was so proud of Quinton. He knocked him out. He knocked him out. I mean, it was just like this. It was like a jab, uppercut, hook, all landed. And knocked him out. And I just thought, that's the greatest thing you've ever done. And
then what he get, this is pre him winning the Pride, right? The light heavyweight belt.
Well, he never won the light heavyweight belt.
It was at the Grand Prix.
He fought Wanderlei in the Grand Prix.
Right. Okay. There we go.
But he did win the UFC belt.
Right.
And I mean, he had some great wars, but just to put him against a bona fide, experienced, credentialed striker like that, which is basically throwing him to the wolves, right?
That's incredible. But that just kind of shows you the internal fortitude that he had, But I mean, if the folks that do or don't know his story, I mean, he grew up pretty poor in Memphis, So like wrestling was his life, but it was actually, much like Ali and Tyson before, they were actually pro wrestling fans, and Memphis was a hotbed with Jerry the King Lawler and all that jazz, and he was highly influenced by those. I mean, so I've heard, and it might have been confirmed by Quinton himself, but him wearing the chain was his ode to Junkyard Dog, who was, a great star of the 70s and 80s in pro wrestling. But that was, I believe, one of the first positive black, figures that Quinton Rampage Jackson saw as a youngin.
Yeah, I was so proud of him, man, and I just was so excited to hear about that because it was in Japan, so I didn't get to see it live. I saw it on a Japanese feed, as a matter of fact, and I don't speak Japanese, but I remember the lady in the studio that was describing it, just her voice inflections, the way she changed when he knocked him out, and then they fought again.
Yeah,
They fought again, and Quinton beat him again, so it was legit win 2 times.
that's incredible. Now you were saying about there was a story that you were kind of saving.
On which one?
You were saying about the with Colin in an apartment.
No, so Colin, what I was saying was Colin was saying, fuck it, tell them yes. Like he wasn't afraid. It wasn't irrational. He was just saying, you know what? Tell them yes, because they kept changing opponents. I'm like, fuck, it's like, it just seems like shitty business to keep changing opponents. And it didn't ruffle his feathers at all. He was very confident in what he had gotten Quinton to be able to do with his stand up. And that's what I was alluding to when I said, just the way Colin is to this day, and
Yeah,
even back then, he's just like, he knows when he's got a prepared fighter.
and he's had so many since that. Carlos Esparza, he's Cheeto Vera. I mean, there's a litany of it. That people that have come out of Team Oyama, in Costa Mesa, and become world champions everywhere, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much that fighters put up with that people don't know about, like money and health insurance and injuries and enough fights. I mean, I started managing fighters because I wanted to help fighters, and then I realized that fighters don't have enough fights. And I mean, fuck, I remember I got Ricardo Lamas a fight on 48 hours notice. They called me on Tuesday for a Thursday fight, and it was a televised show on the WEC, and he was out of Chicago. And a lot of times, short notice fights, you're pretty much just fighting their guy. And his coach told me, Ricardo Lamas' coach told me, Tommy, we'll fight anyone they have except the champ, who at the time was Razor Rob
McCullough. Yep.
And I'm like, okay. So I called up Sean Shelby, and it was a Sunday night, and he said, we like him, Tommy. Just keep him busy. We just don't have any for him right now. And then 2 days later, I was in a meeting in LA. I was actually getting on a plane that night when I made that call to Sean Shelby, who said, just keep him busy. And it was Sean Shelby, and I knew it was because I could see by the phone number, and I wasn't holding the meeting. I was attending the meeting, and I said, excuse me a second. I walked outside, and I go, Sean? He goes, hey, Tommy, yeah, we have an opportunity here. And I said, okay. And he said, Rich Crunkleton got hurt, and he's not going to be able to make the fight against Bart Palasuski. Do you think Ricardo would like that fight? And I said, yes, we'll take it. He goes, okay, well, check with his corner and call. I said, Sean, we'll take it. He goes, don't you want to check with his corner? I go, I already did, and I'm not going to hang up, because if I do, somebody you've already called will call you back and say yes, and I'm not going to take that chance. So before we hang up, the answer is yes, we'll take the fight.
Well played, by the way. Well played.
And we won. And we won.
The pudding there, yeah.
It was a 2-day notice. The fight was Thursday night.
And you got it, what, Monday?
Tuesday I got it. They did
so that's Sunday,
blood work. Yeah, so they had to work around the clock. They had to go to free clinics and shit to get the blood work done and shit. And be on a plane Wednesday night. And they wanted him there Tuesday night. But we go, dude, man, you just called us. Come on. Like, When the athletic commission started supervising fights, I happened to be managing somebody who was on the very first Strikeforce MMA show, because that was the first California commission.
Sanction event. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I had a guy on that show named Jesse Fujarsik who fought Daniel Puder, who I knew from AKA. So like I was always fighting guys from AKA, even though that was where my roots were. It's like, God, I swear, I love you all from across the cage. I love you.
Yeah.
Don't kick our ass.
And it's crazy, right? With Daniel Puder, where he kind of bridges the gap in both MMA and pro wrestling, right? Because he wins the WWF show Tough Enough, and famously or infamously on live WWE SmackDown, Kurt Angle, Olympic gold medalist in 1999, former member of the Foxcatcher crew, right? Basically, Puder shoots on him for real. And they had to kind of pull some shenanigans because he was making Kurt Angle look huge, and they had tons of money invested in Angle at the time, right? And Peter was about to kill Angle, put him in. I can't remember the move. It was like some sort of front face lock or whatever. Kurt gets blown up, and then a call is made to the ref like, "Hey, disqualify Peter." And so you want Angle to win. This is supposed to be an open challenge, and Kurt Angle, our guy, and an Olympic gold medalist. He won that gold medal with a broken freaking neck. Yeah, he's going to get assed out on TV.
Man, and Daniel Puder, that guy, I watched him grow like a leaf at AKA. I think he was probably like 16 when I met him, and oh my God, that guy got big.
Yeah, huge. And he's got his own foundation and living out in Florida now, so shout out to Daniel Puder. But yeah, that guy got a supposed $1 million contract from the WWE through Tough Enough, but there was some shenanigans happening, and very soon after he was out of the promotion. So yeah,
just like that.
Yeah, which is funny now because the UFC and WWE are now one company. It's all relative.
Yeah, and I was going to tell you, I got that same fighter, Jesse Fujarsik, was Kane's first professional fight in Strikeforce. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you look at Kane's record, so that was what was so cool about having the relationship with Javier, because Javier was matchmaking for Strikeforce. Him and Bob Cook, either they shared it or one was doing it all or the other was doing it all, depending on what era of Strikeforce. But Javier called me and said, "Would your guy like to fight Kane?" And I knew my guy would like to fight Kane. Nobody knew who Kane was. I knew who Kane was. And anyway, he took the fight. Of course, Kane won. And then ironically, that relationship continued because I had a fighter named John Devine. May he rest in peace. He passed away this year. He was Cormier's second fight in the same venue at Save Mart, Fresno State. He fought Cormier.
Wow.
So it helped because of my relationships that fighters knew I could get them fights. And that's what fighters want, are fights.
Yep.
And I got Jesse a fight against Kane, and I got John a fight against Cormier. I got Shannon a fight against Frank. I got Bobby his first Pride fight against Vitor. I was blessed to have Quinton. So let me tell you what was fucked up about Pride. So they had a rule. If you were 5 kilos over, the lighter guy could opt for kicks to the head on the ground if you were a middleweight, which was 205 or below. If you were a heavyweight, then it was 10 kilograms weight differential for the lighter guy to opt for kicks to the head on the ground. Now, stay with me.
Mhm.
Sounds easy enough, right? Sounds easy enough, but they didn't want that rule removed. So it only applied during title fights or GPs. So the weight rule only mattered during GPs where you had to make 205 or you had to make heavyweight because they only had 2 weight classes. Okay. Only a GP or a belt. All the other fights were just entertainment. And if the weight's not at issue, then the rules don't apply. If all the planets lined up and it was a title or a GP and it was going to be for 205, let's say, and there was a weight difference, to avoid applying the no head kicks on the ground rule, they would either make the heavier guy lose weight or the lighter guy gain weight to close the gap and eliminate applying the fucking rule. I swear.
Man, but pride, right? Because it's, kind of recalled back as it's like amazing ancient times. You kind of highlighted it a little while back, where everybody wanted to go to Pride because Pride was filling out like literally stadiums where UFC was struggling. Dana White famously says the reason why they don't have any stage set up now, almost a la the WWE and pro wrestling at large, is because in those early days they couldn't fill the venue, so they needed to fill the venue with 30%, of stage to make it look at least halfway decent on the video feeds.
Now, I will say, I believe I'm right on this. The largest MMA attendance record in America remains Frank and Caesar, the first Strike Force in San Jose.
Mm.
That's 19,000, like 200 or 800. But we've never had 20,000 people in an American stadium for MMA to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know there was one that was close.
Yes.
I think it was a K1 show. Which is kickboxing, so it
Right.
automatically it qualifies it for this conversation. But that's the one where I believe Brock Lesnar made his debut, and that was here in LA at the Coliseum.
That was
Again,
kickboxing?
not MMA. Yeah, it was Brock Lesnar. I think he might have fought in Hangman Choi, the 7-foot Korean gent.
Wow.
Yeah. That happened.
And I'll tell you, I've been to a Super Bowl and I've been to a Pride, and the electricity in the air is the same because Pride is so fucking exciting. And they have 3 of those a year, right? They were having 3 a year. There's only one Super Bowl a year. But I remember when we all got checked in and we were just killing time, Quinton said, let's go out this door. And that's where the fans were up against the barricade, and they would give them gifts. Like they would make figurines of them or a painting of them, or they would do some likeness of the fighter and give that to them. And they were giving Quinton gifts of these personally made paintings and figurines of them in their fighting shorts and really cool stuff. Really cool stuff.
And you're seeing, the legend that is, Quinton Rampage Jackson kind of formulating and knowing that he had a, not the easiest of childhood. So What was that moment like? Seeing him being appreciated for his art, for once. How was that?
Quinton is a really nice guy, and I had a similar upbringing. I had a pretty hard life as a kid. No dad, no money, um, abused at home, and he's really he's very gentle, and when like a lot of fighters, unless they're posturing up against another fighter, they're usually pretty cool with civilians. He came over my house and he kept calling my wife Mrs. Rojas, and I kept telling him to stop it. And he played video games with my son Alex, and he's just a regular guy. And I could see that that's what he wanted to be, was just a regular guy who put in some, very hard work to be. There's always injuries, like he had this bad knee, and I thought, God, I know what that's like, man. What's it like to have a bad knee, and have to fight and stuff? So he's really done a lot, and yet he's a pretty gentle soul, I would say.
I mean, I love it. I absolutely love it. Uh, I mean, he has ventured in the last, very recently. He has his own podcast, the Jackson Podcast. Have you been able to give that a listen?
I have. In fact, Shannon Rich went on there, and I told Shannon to tell Quinton to call me. So that hasn't happened yet, but we had some special times together, and I was able to help him get to that next level, and he made a lot of people a lot of money, including himself, and he's had a good life from what I can tell. And whether it's Quinton or Bobby or Shannon or any of these guys, they all mean a lot to me because they let me into their world. And even though like I don't have any conversations with Dana White anymore, but I know that if like my niece was at a Q&A one night when they were doing some fan exposition, and she said, "Hey, Dana White's asking questions. What should I ask him?" I say, "Hey, tell him Tommy said hello." And she goes, "Wow. He said, how are you?" I go, "Yeah." Because people don't forget people.
Right.
People don't forget people, and it's okay if we drift apart. Like I was going to tell you that there's a fighter named Pat Smith, and I got him a fight in Yama Pit Fighting. And Yama Pit Fighting was the next production of the original UFC owner, Bob Myrowitz.
Right.
And Bob Myrowitz was on Inside MMA on HD Net, I believe it's called.
Yeah, absolutely. With Boss Rutten and Kenny Rice.
Right. So I happened to be watching it one night when Bob Myrowitz was announcing that he was going to start a new promotion called Yama Pit Fighting, and he was going to have a senior division where he wanted some of his original UFC fighters to fight on his card. And ironically, about a week later, I got a phone call from a friend of mine in Arlington, Texas, named Frank Nguyen. And Frank said, "Do you remember Pat Smith?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, he just left my gym." I go, "No kidding." He said, he wants to get back into the UFC or Strikeforce. And I told him, the only person I know that can do that is Tommy Rojas. And I said, "Well, thank you. How old is he?" He said, 45. I said, "How does he look?" He goes, "Fucking amazing." So I said, well, I just saw Meyerowitz on Inside MMA, and I can't really call the UFC or Strikeforce and pitch a 45-year-old fighter because I think that would not look good.
Right.
But I can call Rich Meyerowitz. I don't know him, but I'll find him. And I did. And I got his matchmaker on the phone, and they made him a fight to fight Mark Kerr in Yama pit fighting. So the Yama was the name of the floor. So instead of a flat canvas, it was like a bowl. So it kept the fight. It kept the fight off the screen and made them fight down in the field. And so we made a fight for Pat to fight. And then the following week, I got a call that Pat was in jail.
What?
Now the fight's probably 6 weeks away. Okay. And Pat was in jail in Oklahoma. I got the contract like on Friday. And back then I asked them to fax it to me because attachments weren't really being done that way, like PDFs and stuff. So I wanted a hard copy in my hand. And then I would fax it, in this case, to his girlfriend, who was in Oklahoma, and Pat couldn't believe that I got him $10,000 for a fight, which was a lot of money. It's a first time in a promotion.
Right.
You know, 10 grand is not what people normally make their first fight in a promotion, especially when you're 45. So he said, I don't believe it. I want to see the contract. So I faxed it to the wife. She takes it in on visiting hours in jail, and he signs the fucking contract.
In jail.
In jail. So we were hoping, so according to Pat, I spoke to him on the phone with the trainer, and he said, so the charges were evading arrest, 150 miles an hour on a bike, and possession of somebody else's prescription pills.
Okay.
And Pat said, I will get all of these thrown out except the speeding. And I wasn't evading arrest. It took them half an hour to catch up to me. And he goes, it was my brother-in-law's motorcycle, so it was his pills. And I wasn't doing 150, I was doing 180.
Wow. Wow.
So the promoter called me and said, Tommy, I'm sorry, but I can't hold a spot for him. I said, well, he says he's going to get all those charges dropped. He goes, Tommy, unless that wasn't him on that motorcycle that got arrested, I can't hold a spot for him.
Jeez.
So I go, okay, well, you're bringing in 40-year-old fighters, and I know fighters that are 40 might have an injury, and you might have an open spot. So he goes, plus the athletic commission won't approve him. It was Jersey. And I go, well, if I get Jersey to approve him and you have an opening, will you take him? He goes, if. I go, okay. Give me the commissioner's phone number to Jersey. So I called him, and his name is Nick Lembo. And I think I was kind of bugging him because it's funny, man. He goes, all right, you get me discharged from court with only speeding, and I'll approve him. I go, great. Where should I fax them to? He gives me the phone number. I go, all right, I'll be in touch. About a week later, Pat Smith is out, and the only charge was speeding.
Wow.
And Mark Kerr pulled out because of an injury. and so did Oleg Taktarov.
Wow.
So Pat Smith ended up fighting Butterbean.
What?
Yep. And Butterbean weighed 440.
Yeah.
He was the king of the 4-round fight. Remember, he was the right-hand knockout guy.
Yeah, the tough man champ.
So they fought that night as scheduled on the date that we always planned on fighting. And it was who's the announcer? It was El Profesor. What's his name? Anyway, they were calling the play-by-play, and he knocked him out. He hit him with leg kicks, and Butterbean was down, and Pat Smith looked amazing. But, you know, that was one of those fights where people says you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. Just like the 2-day notice I got for Ricardo Lamas. Right. I got Bobby Hoffman to fight. I got him back in the UFC when people said that would never happen. Mm-hmm. He fought on the same night. He fought on the same night in the UFC that Quinton fought in Pride when I was with Quinton in Tokyo. People said I couldn't do that.
Which is kind of your ethos, right? You know, people say you can't do something and you figure out a way to make it happen.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen. Well, people didn't understand my relationship with Dana White and Joe Silva. You know, I got Bobby Hoffman back in the UFC after they cut him for smoking weed. And he got offered a fight, it's funny, against Mark Kerr. This is all in 2001. All of this is in 2001. And except the Quinton fight was, I think, 2002, and the Butterbean fight might have been 2008. But all these other fights, like Bobby Hoffman, I got him back in the UFC after all the haters said there's no way, because he got cut for weed. And I got him back in the UFC. And he fought Josh Barnett in a rematch. You know, I'll tell you how badass Bobby Hoffman was. If you look at his record, he fought 3 times in one day. He beat Heath Herring, Rico Rodriguez, and he lost to Josh Barnett in the 3rd fight in one day.
All 3 former UFC heavyweight champions.
On September 7th, which was my birthday in 1999. That's why I couldn't forget it when I read it. 3 fights in one night against studs.
Wow.
That's the beauty of the sport. There's just some bad motherfuckers, you know, that they knew how to fucking nut up.
Yeah, nut up for sure.
You know, and they can do things that, you know, that's why the whole process, I used to always observe their process, like fight week and then weigh-in day and the cutting of the weight and all that shit, you know, and I thought, God, it takes a team to get somebody ready, you know? It takes so many people to get somebody ready for, you know, and then when Bobby Southworth got on The Ultimate Fighter 1, there was Josh Koscheck, Mike Swick, and Bobby Southworth, all from AKA on that show. And that was so many years ago and so many lifetimes ago in the world of MMA that, you know, it's nice for you to give me a chance to share these stories, because there's people that can connect the dots on things that they didn't quite know about the history of the sport, that maybe this will help them do that.
No, absolutely. Which, I mean, you spoke about, you know, the moment that you were proud of Quinton, right, and what he had overcome. What's the one thing, and obviously you're not done yet, right? The story continues to write itself. But what is the thing that you're most proud of in terms of your contribution to this fight sports business?
Um, I was I was always proud of doing the hard things, the things that people said, "Oh, you can't get Bobby Hoffman back in the UFC." Guess what, motherfucker? Okay, Tommy, we like Ricardo Lamas. Keep him busy. We just don't have anything for him. The next day, Tommy, we have an opportunity. So the relationships, staying on good terms, and getting that phone call because Javier Mendez and I were always talking. I mean, dude, I used to just hang out at the gym. I was just there. I would work out in the morning. I would do a private with one of the guys, and then I would just cool off, change my clothes, and that's how you got, I don't know, building relationships. It sounds kind of corny, but it's really about relationships. That's what opens up doors. I mean, I don't even know how many times me and Dana White had dinner alone, just me and him across the street from the, it was right next to the Palace Station. I mean, people give you their time if they find that their time is appreciated. I think that's what I learned how to do was I would show people that I appreciated their time. And I made some hard fucking fights.
Making the impossible possible.
Hard fucking fights, and earning people's trust. Like I remember when I made that fight for Bobby, what the people that talked to me, Don Fry, Brian Johnston, Javier Mendez, when Zuffa bought the UFC, Don Fry was still just doing New Japan Pro Wrestling. And that's one of the three prongs. Pride, K1, and New Japan Pro Wrestling are all under the Inoki umbrella.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was on fire. My phone was blowing up. I was getting fighters virtually every day. And I remember I asked Don Fry, I said, I would love to manage you now that you're going to go back into fighting. And he said, cool. And we hadn't met yet. And I said, I'd like to fly out and just meet you in person. He lives in Tucson. And, just shake on it. And you've heard Don Fry talk, right?
Yes.
He goes, we don't need to meet. Brian says you're cool. You're cool. You fuck me over, I'll kill you, or Brian will kill you.
Yep, that's not right.
So I said, well, I'm coming out anyway. And one day I flew to Tucson, and he had one of his buddies drop him off at the curb and did circles around the airport. And Don Fry actually went through security and met me as I walked off my plane. And we did dinner. We took dinner. We had dinner and just the relationships, Colin Oyama. I'm telling you, from that moment on, I was like, so I guess I'm most proud of, and the thing I'm also thankful is of the people that let me into their world, because there was so many of them.
Yeah.
I made a fight for a guy named Tim Stout. 2 fights. He's out of the greater Atlanta area. Okay. I got Tim Stout 2 fights in Colorado. I never went to either one. He won both of them. So it was a good day.
I would say so.
The promoters that I met, like I showed you that picture where Scott Coker asked me to be the referee in this fight that Tatar was making. I'm like, really? He goes, no, really. They want a referee. And I thought you'd be perfect for it. what do they want me to do? He goes,
how did that come about?
So we were just sitting there. You know, one of the most beautiful times of the process is everybody's checked in. The gates are not open yet. And it's just the staff and people. And the HP Pavilion where the strike force was pretty much empty. And somebody said, Tommy will do it. And I said, do what? And Scott said, you want to be a referee in a fight? I go, they're making a movie and they need a referee. And I said, yeah, I mean, I hope. What do I do? They go, just go down there. They'll tell you what to do. So I went down there and they said, just stay here. And then in between the fights, they didn't make any announcement. There was no spotlight. And Oleg Taktarov came down the ramp. And then this guy named John Murphy, we became friends after that, come down the ramp. And we got into the cage. And the cameraman that's making this movie, he's in there. And they start fighting. And I said to Taktarov, I whispered, I go, how is the fight supposed to end? Just tell me how it's supposed to end. And he never said anything to me. So I was just acting like you remember that referee in Bloodsport? Like, it didn't look like he was doing shit. Remember that guy with the long robe? I kind of felt like that guy. Then the fight, I know. Then the fight was over, and I thought, because people didn't announce what was going on. I think Bobby Southworth was fighting next, but it was funny because they didn't have a mouthpiece, they didn't have gloves, they weren't wearing a cup, and Taktarov was deciding when the fight ended, and that was it. But Sure Dog took a picture of it and put it on Sure Dog. That's where that picture was. I showed it. It was from Sure Dog, from the event.
Jeez. And are you getting any of those sweet residual checks from your appearance in the movie?
Oh yeah, I don't even know what the movie's called. That movie was made, I don't even know if it made the. You'll hear a funny story talking about Sure Dog. So when I used to go to the IFC and King of the Cage, I used to sit next to Sure Dog, and we were at the IFC one time at Table Mountain Casino, and those things were always fucking nuts, man. They were always nuts. So there's a guy from Cesar Gracie's named Steve Heath, okay. And Steve Heath is actually who Nick Diaz credits with talking him into coming training way back in the day. Wow. Steve Heath, who I watched fight several times and is just as tough as they fucking come. So Steve Heath is fighting. And I'm sitting next to Sure Dog, and the fight is across the cage. But it's right in front of us, but it's across the cage. And you can see that Steve Heath's shorts, he was fighting in Valley Tudo shorts, and you could tell that they were kind of coming down, like they were falling down. And there was some sort of jawing going on between Steve Heath and the opponent's corner, because they were right in front of his opponent's corner. But it was too loud to know what they were saying. So all of a sudden the referee stops the fight, and we thought Steve Heath was going to pull his pants up, but instead he fucking drops his pants and moons the corner because the fight's over. Now he's walking back to the other corner where Cesar Gracie and all those guys are in his corner, which is toward us. And I go, whoa, he fucking mooned that guy. And they start jumping into the cage, and one of them fucking cold cocks him from behind. And the Cesar Gracie guys, it was too loud for them to tell him to look out because the guy came up to him. So they jump in, and there was a fucking brawl inside this cage. And I'm thinking, this is not a fight I'm going to try and break up. So me and Sure Dog were sitting at this table, and people were using our table to jump into the cage. And I just thought, He fucking pulled his pants down and showed him his ass, and that pissed him off, and all hell broke loose. And I just thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever seen.
Nah, that's up there. That's pretty up there. Now, obviously, Tommy, in your career thus far, you've had a throng of support that have pushed you to do things that you didn't think you could do, and it has impacted every aspect of now MMA. And before it was called MMA. Uh, Take as long as you like, but let's get some shout outs of the way, the people who have gotten you to where you are now.
Oh, thank you. I have to start with AKA, Javier Mendez, Bob Cook, Bobby Southworth, my first fighter, and Brian Johnston. And then at home, my son, who was so young, and my son, Alexander Rojas, he's now my my fitness coach. And I had him with me at the gym, at the fights. I had a financial supporter who paid my expenses named Alan Weesey, and without him, I couldn't have traveled like I did because I seemed to always be far away at a fight. And obviously, all the fighters, Quinton, Shannon, everybody, Bobby Hoffman, Pat Smith, may he rest in peace, and my wife, just so many people that put up with a lot of my shit because I was gone a lot. It's hard on the family, man. You're gone a lot. You know, Scott Coker and Carrie, his assistant, they were just always so cool to me, you know, at the events, and just all the fighters that let me build and build and build a name that, you know, and today, and just, I got to give a shout out to Darcy Olita Jiu-Jitsu. That's the shirt I'm wearing. I train there. I don't do jiu-jitsu. I strike. And my striking coach is Zach Bikomong. And I'm Bazooka Jab, by the way, on Instagram. I'm Bazooka Jab. And just, it's like a dream come true to have done all these things, and so many people that were part of it, because I couldn't have done it without them. So thank you for letting me get that out.
Absolutely. And I mean, thank you for everything that you contributed. You know, the fact that you are still married in this, and I went through a divorce. I mean, still going through it. So, you know, shout out to your wife and your son, Alex, for supporting you in this crazy dream. And you've made an indelible impact in so many people. So I'd like to thank you. And also, I mean, you said it, but let's do it. Where can people find you on the socials?
I am Bazooka Jab on Instagram and Tommy Rojas on Facebook.
Oh, yeah, brother. And thank you so much for doing this. And thank you guys for watching us here at According to Woods. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Yeah, or X, whatever it's been called nowadays. Tommy, you're subscribed to the podcast, aren't you?
I am, yes. As of when we met, yes, and I'm so proud to be. And if I'm not, make sure you tell me if I didn't do it, because I want to make sure that I subscribe to it.
Absolutely, will do. So he's subscribing to it. I'm subscribed because it's not nepotism if you want yourself to succeed, right? So go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. But if you don't believe me, you don't believe Tommy, and I don't know why you wouldn't, here's Pro Wrestler Zeta Zhang to help convince you.
Hey, this is Zeta Zhang. Make sure you subscribe to According to Woods YouTube.